Yeah. So it's kind of more legible. Okay. So in today's class, we're going to be talking about Scrum.
Just a minute, Mr. Austin. I think to the left-hand corner, you can close that navigation panel, so everything is bolder.
Okay. Now, actually use the navigation panel for moving around.
All right, maybe just reduce it. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me just reduce it a bit. Okay. Okay, so greetings everyone. Welcome to another class. Today we're going to be talking about Scrum. And so today's class is on Scrum we're going to look at three critical areas. We're going to look at product vision. We're going to look at sprint planning. And we're going to look at sprint review and sprint retrospect. However, the focus is going to be on sprint planning. So while I will go through just, to give a little context to what sprint, product vision, sprint review, and sprint retrospect, what it is, just to give a general idea, my major focus will be on sprint planning. So that is just a brief overview of how the class is going to go today. So starting with one, which is the sprint. So what is a sprint? A sprint is a time-box iteration of 1 month or less, during which a done, usable, and potentially releasable product increment is created. Sprints have consistent durations throughout a development effort. So this is the definition of sprint. But in layman's English, sprint is just the time it takes you to complete a particular user story, epic, or future. That is my own definition. That is Austin's definition. You might have a different perspective to it. So what it simply means is that the time it takes you to complete a future and then review that future in your sprint review and your sprint retrospect is just simply what is sprint. So let me just repeat that. So sprint is the time it takes for you to complete a particular user story or epic or product future, depending on the size or complexity of that product. So that is my definition. This other one is just the theory behind sprint. Finish. Okay, so let's move down to a use case. Now, a software development team working on a new mobile app features might plan a 2-week sprint to develop and integrate a new user authentication system. So when you are, if you look at this now, this is an epic. This is not a user story. How did I know that it's not a user story? First of all, it has key big terms. It has user authentication system. User authentication system is not one thing. It's not like a one screen thing. There are multiple steps in a user authentication system. You understand? Now, if you look at this one, features might plan a 2-week sprint to develop and integrate. So you see now, so you have like, this is more like, how will I put it? You can pretty much call it, it's more like in the broad features functionality stage, more like. So this is like expected functionality, more like, in my own opinion. Why? Because you are having the develop keyword, integrate keyword for user authentication system, making it a feature rather than an epic or a user story. You understand? But we're using this feature as an example. So now, if you look at the characteristics here, they're saying usually sprints are usually between 2 to 4 weeks. So now when they say usually, it doesn't mean that at all use case and in every single example, sprints are 2 to 4 weeks. They're just saying that ideal case situations, sprint is 2 to 4 weeks, which means there are exceptional situations where it goes beyond 4 weeks. But that is just what it is. So now, you have consistency, the length of, so all these are characteristics of a sprint. The length of a sprint is consistent throughout the project if a team chooses 2 weeks, it should always be 2 weeks. So why, and this is where, this is the power of sprints. So when you have chosen that our sprint duration, which means the time it takes to evaluate and finish a user story, is 2 weeks. So if you're dedicating 2 weeks to it, then which means throughout the duration or the life cycle of that project, you are supposed to stick to 2 weeks. Why is this important? What if I decide to make it 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, as I choose? After all, nobody's going to flog me, or nobody's going to arrest me if I decide to change the duration. Well, the reason why you stick to a consistent duration is because of something they call sprint velocity. You understand? So if you constantly change the duration it takes to complete a particular sprint, you are going to have this. You will find it very difficult to determine your sprint velocity. It will be like mission impossible, like literally. Anyway, although there are some people that might find a miracle formula to that, but that is just what it is. All right, so one of the benefits of sprints or characteristics of sprints is focus. Now, each sprint aims to achieve a sprint goal and deliver a product increment, such as the new user authentication system. So a sprint just looks at outcomes. What can we achieve or build this product within the time frame needed to get it out? You understand? Then the next part is the scope. The scope may be clarified or renegotiated, but there are no changes, but no changes are made that would endanger the sprint goal. So once your sprint planning has been concluded, the sprint goal has been determined, the sprint has kicked off, you cannot make changes to the goalpost. You understand? Otherwise, you're going to cause a lot of issues with regards to project completion timeline. That is meeting up with the project completion timeline as I went due. All right. So the next part is the quality assurance. Now, high quality is ensured through continuous integration and testing, because sprint emphasizes on as you build, you integrate, you test. As you build, you integrate, you test. And then what your testing can be checking out how other users are using the product to see if it's working as it's supposed to, or testing to see that it's not buggy or laggy as a result of maybe conflict with another setting or functionality or feature that has been built previously, because that may happen. So then you have the regular cadence. Now, sprints create a predictable delivery cadence, such as releasing new features every 2 weeks. So that's it about that. Now you come to product vision. What is product vision? Product vision is a forward-looking statement that sets the direction and guides the work of the Scrum team. It articulates the purpose and objectives of the product, providing a clear understanding of the desired end state. So let me put this in layman English. What this is saying is that if you want to build anything, you should first understand or determine the purpose. Why are you building this? The purpose is very key. Once the purpose is determined, then it's a whole lot easier to know the end goal in mind, because you are building with the end goal in mind. However, if the product vision is not determined, if the reason why you are building that product is not determined, then you would not know when you get to the final destination. When you achieve your product vision, how do you even know that you've gotten there? That is one of the benefits of having a product vision. You understand? So this is just a typical use case for a startup developing a fitness app. The product vision might be to empower individuals to achieve their health fitness goals through personalized data-driven insights. Data-driven insight and motivational challenges. Now, what are the characteristics of a product vision? Now, the characteristics of a product vision is this. There is clarity. It gives inspiration to the team. The team is focused on what they need to get done. They are building for the customer because the outcome of the product is more important. And there is guidance as to how they need to get what they need to get done. So what that means is that what you need to achieve, it's easier to achieve it because there's guidance as to what exactly it is the team wants to achieve. All right, so we come down to the next part, sprint planning. So what is sprint planning? Sprint planning is an event. Sprint planning is an event that marks the beginning of the sprint. The work to be performed in the sprint is planned during this meeting, involving the entire Scrum team. Now, what is the objective of the sprint planning meeting? Define sprint goal. Establish a sprint goal that provides a shared objectives for the team. For example, implement user authentication system. Select backlog items. Identify and select the backlog items to be completed in the sprint, like user registration, login, and password recovery. Create a plan. Develop a plan on how to achieve the sprint goal and deliver the selected backlog items. So, talking about sprint planning meeting in all this plenty English, let's break it down to layman English because I like to put perspective to things. So, sprint planning, if you want to do a sprint planning meeting, imagine it like this. You are the product manager. You have your Scrum Master, you have your developers, your designers, and your testers. Each and every one of you sits down to review your product backlog. Now, from your product backlog, you would now define the goal, which is this thing here. What do we want to achieve in this sprint? Since we've already identified that the duration is going to take us to complete a user story is 2 weeks. So if we're using 2 weeks to complete a user story, then what will the goal? What can we achieve in that 2 weeks? Okay, we want to do a login, logout system. If you want to do a login, logout system, why are we choosing that? Because it will require 6 days or 7 days or 8 days to complete the user registration, login, and password recovery. Why? Because there is already an infrastructure on ground that we can just leverage on. We don't have to build from scratch. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We already have the system we can just go and take from and just build upon. You understand? So which means that the time for development is smaller. So which means this is the best pick to make. Then the next one is create a plan. So the plan is how do we achieve the sprint goal and deliver expected backlog items. So now let's go a little down from here. So we now come to the process. So we're still talking about sprint planning. I'll still talk about the step-by-step process, but still talking about the process. So for the sprint planning, what is the input? The input is the product backlog, the latest product increment, capacity of the Scrum team, past performance. So this is the input. So let me explain this in a short while. So the product backlog is like, just look at it as an inventory of features and functionality that the product development team wants to create or build or bring to life. You understand? Now, you have that particular inventory list. It could be a document, it could be an Excel sheet, it could be in an Agile, it could be in Jira, it could be in ClickUp, it could be in Monday.com or whatever product management tool you use. You understand? That's that. Then this will now be like, okay, we have made, we've concluded a particular feature. You add it to your product list of things that you've done. You understand? Then the capacity is just looking at availability, really. So when you say capacity, you're saying who is going on leave, who is going to be available, how much free time do you have to develop the work, especially if you are dealing with freelancers. If you are dealing with people, maybe you have employees, then you pretty much know that nobody's going for leave at least within the next 4 weeks or 1 month of that particular, for at least for 2 sprints. How will I put it now? I'm trying to look for the word. So let's say you have each sprint is 2 weeks, and you know that for 2 sprints, your team are going to be available, which means you have higher capacity versus if maybe in this sprint 10 team members will be available, but in the second phase of the sprint, maybe in the second sprint, in the second half of the month, 1 or 2 team members will not be around. So this automatically affects your capacity, technically. So past performance is based on performance that happened in the past. What was the result like? So yeah, you come down to the collaborative effort. This is the product owner presents the prioritized backlog items, and the team discusses and agrees on the sprint goal and scope. So all of this process, I am going to explain it in this step-by-step approach for conducting a sprint planning meeting. But for now, I'm just giving you an overview of what this step-by-step is going to look like, this step-by-step that I'm highlighting here. So now, what happens here is that the product owner presents the prioritized backlog items, and the team discusses and agrees on the sprint goal and scope. I've also explained this part in my previous classes. So now here, coming down to commitment, the developers commit to the sprint goal and agree on the work to be done, which means that whatever is documented has to be agreed that, okay, what you've indicated that the work indicated, the work that needs to be done is something that the developer can actually handle for that particular sprint. That is this particular commitment. So these are the processes for a sprint planning meeting. So let's go to sprint review. So now for a sprint review, this is an event held at the end of the sprint to inspect the increments and adapt the product backlog. If needed, during this event, the Scrum team and stakeholders collaborate on what was done in the sprint. Now, this particular one is a sprint review is different from a sprint retrospect. I will explain in a minute. So a sprint review is saying that, okay, based on the sprint that we've just completed, what did we get right? What did we do wrong? Did we meet our objective of what we wanted to build? Don't forget that in a sprint, you have a goal in mind. You have an objective in mind. So the review is comparing based on what is achieved and based on the original goal and objective. Did we meet the goal and objective for that sprint? If yes, we did, good, that's good, move on to the next one. If no, then where did we miss it? What was the problem? What obstacle or barrier was experienced to, delay, disturb, or affect the achievement of the goal and objective? So that's just what this sprint review is. It's just a layman language of this big English here. Okay, so moving down to the objective. All right, so if you look at this, in the objective, you inspect the increment. Now, if you look at this review the completed work and ensure it meets the definition of done. For instance, demonstrate the new user authentication system. So now, when you are inspecting the increment, what this means is that you, the product manager, will look at what the product, the developers have done and validate that what they've done is in alignment with the goal and objective for that particular sprint. So that is it. So, which means that before the developer reaches out to you to tell you that he's done, which means that you would have already set and determined an acceptance criteria for this definition of done. So when they are coming back to you, you guys are not going back and forth on what each of you consider as your definition of done, because the acceptance criteria has already been determined from the get-go. All right, so you now come to the feedback. So in the feedback, you collect feedback from stakeholders and customers, such usability feedback from beta testers. So this feedback is when you share the products with maybe some focus users, some remote users, like a selected number of users to use the product and give you feedback as to what is wrong, what could be improved on, and what can be adjusted. That's what this gathering of feedback is. Then this particular part, adopt product backlog. Now you update the product backlog based on feedback and new insights, like adding new security features based on tester feedback. Now, this adapting of product backlog is general with everybody. So you are building a product. Now, in the course of building the product, you realize that the way you built the user authentication system can actually be improved. Probably it was designed in a certain way, but it could be improved in another way, such that it can actually increase scalability. So probably the way it was designed does not capture scalability of the product. And then you realize a better way to create the same particular user authentication system, then you make modifications. So that is where adapting of product backlog, making adjustments to based on the feedback of others and based on your own personal observation from what you've seen in the course of testing and getting users' feedback. Then this is the process to it. Now the process, the developers present the increment demonstrating what was done. Discussion, they engage in a collaborative discussion with stakeholders about the progress, market condition, and next steps. Then use insights to plan future sprints. So this is just how a review looks like. This is just the steps that happens in a review. You present what you did, you discuss about your presentation, and you talk your next plans of action. So that is just sprint review. So coming down to sprint retrospect. Now, sprint retrospect in this case is an event where the Scrum team inspects itself and creates a plan for improvement to be enacted during the next sprint. So this stage is where the developers themselves or the Scrum team kind of look into what was done to say, okay, based on what we want to do and based on the plan, did we get it right? Or should we push it to the next sprint? This is just like my own layman explanation to it. You understand? Because the team itself are looking into what they've done and to see if it is okay before it gets to the sprint review process. So the objectives, reflect on the past sprints regarding people, relationship, processes, and tools. Identify improvements, identify what went well, what did not go well, potential improvements, such as improving communications or refining the definition of done. So in the course of working with your team members, you begin to realize that some people's definition of done is different from what the original definition of done is, which means that there are sometimes misconceptions or misinterpretations or miscommunications based on what was communicated. So say you give, say, our definition of done is, say, when all the expected user stories have been completed. You understand? However, somebody now quickly says, okay, it's not just to complete the user stories, and they rush to the user stories, completes it, and delivers it to you. Now you say, no, this is not what I want. First of all, you notice that there are bugs in what the person has done, and you say, no, this thing is not yet done. Go back to it and revise it. Now you've already given room for interpretation because you were not being specific. So one of the things that happens in retrospect meeting is to say that, okay, sir, in future communication, rather than just making it broad and generic, and say that when we complete user story, that's when we are done. Why not say that whatever user story will be completed has to be tested to be, or micro-tested to be sure that it is working and satisfies the objective before it is brought in as done. You get what I'm trying to say? So when you do that, that's more specific in itself, like it's a little more narrow than when you just make it kind of broad. Then you have creating a concrete plan to implement improvement in the next sprint. So which means that the feedback that you've gotten from your Scrum Masters, from your developers, from your designers, and from others, the feedback you get from them, you make that impact, you make that modification in the next sprint so that it will be better. So that is just it about objectives. Then you talk about the process. You set the stage. You create a safe and open environment for discussion. You gather data, collect insights and data about the past sprint. You generate insight, discuss and analyze the data to identify areas for improvement. You decide on actions, agree on specific actions to improve processes, collaboration, and productivity. You close the retrospect, summarize the discussion, and ensure commitment to the action plan. So let me break it down in layman English. So first of all, you've done your you've finished a particular sprint. You want to do a sprint retrospect. You set the stage, which means you call for a meeting where you guys can discuss. Everybody starts dropping their feedback based on what they felt you could have said better or communicated well, or delivered well, or what you could have adopted that you didn't adopt. That is just the data collection here. Then generating insights. Okay, based on what you've said, based on the recommendations you've dropped, what do you think we can do? Okay, I think in next sprint we should do this, we should do that. All that feedback is the insights, because now you are dropping recommendation as to what you guys think can be improved upon in subsequent sprints. Then you decide on actions. Okay, once the recommendation has been notified, okay, this is what we're going to do. John, you're going to do this, do this, do this, do that, so that we avoid this. Frank, I would like you to get this, get that, so that we can achieve this. Sandra, it would be nice if you can get this, get that, get this, and communicate this using this and that and this, so that we can avoid this. You understand? So that has already been, now you've already assigned responsibility to different persons, and then action is set, at least to ensure that the insight that has been, the insight and data that was gathered will not go unimplemented. So then you close the retrospect. So that is just it about the sprint retrospect. So let's go to sprint planning. So for the sprint planning now, so we talk about the step-by-step guide to sprint planning. So we're going to use a typical example of a food tech app. So let's assume that we want to build a food tech app. Like we want to build a food tech app, and we want that users can receive their meals from this app. How are we going to go about it? And let's call this app Distro. Distro, let's give the app the name Distro. Now, Distro, in this case, since Distro is our use case in this case, just to give you a kind of a literary concept as to how sprint planning is typically adopted. Now, for a food tech app. So Distro is a food tech app aiming to streamline food delivery and inventory management for restaurants. So we've already identified what Distro is going to be doing. It's a food delivery and inventory management for restaurants. So which means that restaurants can come on Distro and sell, right? Good. Now the current sprint aims to enhance the user experience by adding a new feature for real-time order tracking. So in this particular Distro, we are assuming that the app has already been built before. We're assuming that the app just needs some incremental changes and adjustments. We are not building the app from scratch. We are just focusing on a particular feature that we want to add to the app to increase its usability for its customers. So that is just what this is here. And what is that feature or functionality we want to add? We want to add real-time order tracking. So which means that when their food is on the way to their particular houses or offices, they don't know where the food rider is, whether it's on the highway or is at their backyard, very close to their house, or is about to, or he has not even left the dispatch location. You understand? So this is what we want to add to the app. So now to begin, so to do a sprint planning meeting for that, the first thing is to do, we're going to do a before the meeting kind of thing. So how is this going to work? We get the product owner, that is, he reviews and prioritizes the product backlog items related to the new real-time order tracking feature. Now, development team. The development team reviews the backlog and prepares questions or points for clarifications. Then the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master ensures that the team understands the sprint planning process and goals. This is just what is done before the actual before the commencement of the building of that particular feature, of the real-time order tracking feature. So now that we've gotten the product owner or product manager, we've gotten the development team on ground, or we have the development, that's the developers, and we have the Scrum Master. Now, the next thing is to start the meeting. So who will now form the sprint planning meeting? We are talking about the product manager, the Scrum Master, the development team. Now, when I say development team, I'm not talking about developers alone. I'm talking about designers, that is product designers or UI designers, and the testers, people that are going to be running UAT testing to ensure, and if you don't know what UAT testing means, UAT means user acceptance testing. Now, we all know, or we've agreed, that a typical sprint should be 2 weeks. So we are having a 2-week sprint, which is going to be typically 2 to 4 hours. You understand? For a 2-week sprint. This is like setting a typical duration for the implementation of our time tracking order, for our food app. So the next thing is to determine the goal. What is the goal? Now, giving an example here for distro, we want to implement a real-time order tracking to enhance customer satisfaction and provide restaurants with live updates on delivery status. So this is what we want. We want customers to be able to know where their food is at every given period of time. So all they just need to do is just click one button and it will tell them where the dispatch guy is before the food gets to them. So now, the next step now will be to determine the product backlog items. Now, in determining the product backlog items, you as the product manager, you are going to present the top priority backlog items that relates to the sprint goal, which is you want people to be able to know where their order is at every given period of time. So now, example of some of the backlog items you might be looking at is user interface for displaying real-time tracking on the customer app, integration with GPS service to fetch real-time location data, notification system to alert customers and restaurants about order status changes, back-end support for real-time data processing and updates. So this is the product backlog item that we are working on. Like if you notice what I said before, each of these is like epics. They are not user stories, they are epics, because in each of them, there are sub-phases or sub-stages in each of them. So now, for this to happen, for the product backlog items to happen in implementation purpose, the UI UX person will create the design. The front-end developer will create the deployment of the interface. And then the back-end guy will, he would do this GPS service to fetch real-time location data. And then you now have the notification system to alert customer. So to alert customers to the restaurant about their changes. Then the back-end guy would do the real-time processing and updates. So while the front-end guy links fetch the real-time location data, the back-end guy ensures that whatever is fetched is happening in real time and does not happen maybe few hours after it has been requested for. So this is what the whole development is going to be like. So now let's come down to the discussion. So we've already identified what the product backlog is going to, that's the product backlog item, we've identified it. So the next thing now is to look at the development team will come and discuss. This is where clarifications will be made based on these 4 items that I've mentioned. And then the feasibility and technical consideration of each of these will be brought on the table. Now, you need to understand that in the realm of development, there are designs that are called feasible designs or feasibly implementable designs and non-feasible implementable design. So there are some designs that you would create that would, although not necessarily impossible to be created, but it will be hard and difficult to create because of the way the product is designed. So which means that the developers are going to have a hard time deploying that particular design. So usually what will now happen here is that the development team will sit down and consider the technical consideration. Now, this technical consideration is going to be based on, will there be recurring costs for what they want to build? What they want to build, does it exist or not? Is it something that they can build on an existing infrastructure, or are they building it from scratch? This is where the technical consideration is going to come in. So they are not going to be looking at how it is going to be built before a single line of code is even written. That is it. So this is what they are going to be discussing. This is what you and your team will be discussing based on feasibility and angle and approach to what is going to be developed. Now, the next thing is estimation of effort required for each item using story points or other estimation method. Now, story point is a popular way for estimating how long it will take to build the user stories, or to build the some of these features and functionalities that we've mentioned in our product backlogs. You understand? So I'll explain that in a minute. So now we go down to the next thing. We determine a plan. So now, what is the plan?
We can't hear you, Mr. Austin.
You cannot hear me? Hello?
Okay, you came back on. You came back on. You go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir. You were off for like 2. We can hear you now. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. What did you hear
last? You just went off for like 5 seconds. You're back. You can go ahead.
Okay. All right. So what I was saying is, we're still talking about distro now. So now, based on what has been, so the story point is what is being used to estimate how long it will take for each functionality on this product backlog to be implemented. So now let's now come down and look at the breakdown of the items. So we want to, each selected item is broken down into smaller and manageable tasks. That is how it is. So now, user interface for real-time tracking. You remember when I said that these product backlogs are like epics. You understand? All these product backlogs here are like epics. So you cannot tell a developer to come and build this. He's going to be looking at you like, how do you want me to build this? Because it is not specific. It doesn't say much. Even if you give him the design, he's still going to be looking a little bit lost. So you need to now break this thing down to make it easier for development. Now, that is where the breakdown here comes in. Now, the user interface for real-time tracking. So first of all, the UI designer, how long is it going? So we estimate. So now, this story points, let me give a little concept of what story points is. Because you might see, because if you see here, you see 2 story points, 3 story points, 2 story points, and you might be wondering, what is story points? So let me explain it. Story point is like duration, the time it's going to take you to complete the implementation of one feature or one epic or one user story. You understand my point? Is what is called a story point. Let me break it down to layman English. You want to design the user interface for real-time tracking. You give it to the UI UX designer or the UI designer or the product designer, as the case may be. The product designer will look at it and say, okay, based on what you want to achieve, it is going to take me 2 days to create. Now, that 2 days is appropriated with 2 story points. So 2 story points means 2 days. It means it will take him 2 days to create this, to design a mock-up for the user interface for a real-time tracking. You understand my point? So that is called 2 story point. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. So the second user story. Now, don't forget I said this is an epic. This is the user story here. Now, in the user story, you will now develop a front-end components for the tracking map. So now this is where the developers come in. So the developers will look at this and say, okay, how best can we build this? They can decide to either use modular programming, or they can decide to use extreme programming, or they can decide to use different methodology, or they can even decide to use next.js. You understand my point? To, to allow them to create components of each sub component of what they want to build. So don't forget that they will have also determined whether they are building on existing infrastructure or they are building this from scratch. If you are building on existing infrastructure, they are also going to check how much is it going to cost us for our app to be tracking the map on a regular basis. Are we going to be paying per track? And if so, how much will it be? In recurring costs, how much will that cost rub off in terms of development? Now, in this case, they are building on an existing infrastructure. So they're not building from scratch. So technically, they are going to be using API call. So you have 3 story points. So the developer says, okay, based on what we want to build, it's going to take us 3 story points, which is 3 days to create it. Then you look at the next user story. The next user story implements API calls to fetch real-time data. Now, to implement API calls, how long is it going to take us to build the API, link the API, feed the API, connect it, and ensure that it is working and there is no lag or bug in the course of the fetching of information between what we want to call and what is being called. And the developer says, okay, since we are calling an existing infrastructure and we are not building it from scratch, it is safe to say that it will take lesser time to build versus if we are to build it from scratch, which will take more time. So in this case, it will take us 2 story points, 2 days. Now, we move down to the next one, integration with GPS services. Now, this is another epic. We say, okay, based on the research and we select GPS service provider. To select GPS service provider, it shouldn't take us time because we're already leveraging on existing structure. So one day should get the job done. The next one, implement GPS service integration. Okay, implementing the GPS service integration, this should not be hard. Why? We are integrating with other existing systems. How long should that take us? Probably 3 days. Because don't forget that you've already identified the service provider from story point 1, and then you are implementing the link in story point 2. So it's going to take us 3 days to get that done, 3 story points. Now, the next one is to test and validate and show that it is working. That takes 2 days. So because of my time, I'll just rush through. Then you look at notification system. Now, this notification system, you're designing the notification template for different statuses. So which means that you're going to have email templates that will be sending notification to users based on different use cases. Probably 1 story point will get that done. Implement backend logic for triggering notification, 2 story points. Develop a front-end component of displaying notification, another 2 story points. Then the backend support. Update database schema to support tracking data, 2 story. Implement data processing logic for real-time updates, 3 story. Conduct load testing to ensure scalability, 2 story. I don't want to take time to start explaining all of this, so I don't take more time than already is. So I believe that just by looking at it, you should be able to, you pretty much understand the user stories from the way they are presented here. Okay, so let me go down to team capacity. Now, this determines the total number of story points the team can commit to based on pass velocity and team availability. So now in that sprint planning meeting, you are now considering, okay, in these 2 weeks that we dedicated for building this particular feature, which of these user stories can we, based on the itemized this, which one can we start with first and how fast can we get it done? That is where consideration on pass velocity and team availability comes in based on what I have said earlier from my previous explanation when I talked about team capacity. All right, so moving on to the next one. So the team average velocity is 20 story points per sprint. After discussion, the team commits to 80 story points for this sprint. So now, team capacity. If you look at what I said before, the team so based on past record, let's say as the product manager, you notice that the story points that were itemized here. So you can see here, we have 2 story, you have 3 story, you have 2 story, you have another 2 story, you have 1 story, So when you sum all this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, when you sum everything up, you notice that from past events that it takes your developers and your designers and your testers 20 days to complete one particular feature. So because when you put a combination of user stories gives birth to an epic, and a combination of epics give birth to features or functionality. And you discover that it takes 20 story points per sprint, which means that your team guys can commit to 20 story points. So what you now do is you break it down to 18 story points. Why? Why can't you just make it 20? You are accounting for delays. The 2 extra story points is you're giving room for delays. Should in case there are delays, barriers, challenges beyond your control or what you facilitated with. Maybe before you felt that, okay, it's not just to link this and link this together. And in the point of linking, you experience a roadblock. You understand? So you reduce the this so that at least your team can complete that particular sprint in record time. You understand? So that is just what this team capacity is about. So we now go to the final. We're approaching. Sorry. So we now go to the final. Okay, not the final part, but we're now finalizing the sprint backlog based on the sprint planning meeting. So here, the finalized list of tasks and user stories is selected for the sprint. Now, example of the sprint backlog for distro, using distro as our use case example. So the user interface for real-time tracking, we have already identified that, okay, we can use developer says 7 story points to do the job. And integration with GPS is 6 story points. Notification is 5 story points. You understand? So this finalization is like, okay, does it mean that what was said before was not finalized? No. It's just like when you are talking about how long is it going to take me to develop a design. And this one says, it will take me 2 days. No, 2 days is too much. Can't you do it if what of people remove this and remove that? Oh, it will take me 7 days. No, let's reduce it. 7 days is too much. We need to get this thing done. So after all those back and forth, what is now finally agreed upon is now what is this finality here. And that's what forms what is written here. So we now go to the next part. Agreement on definition of done. So this is where we define acceptance criteria. So now a clear criteria that must be met for each team to be considered complete. Now, example criteria: code reviewed and merged. All tests, unit integration, and acceptance pass. Documentation is updated. Okay. Features is deployed to staging for stakeholders review. So now, let me explain this. So when we say, you remember when I was talking about acceptance criteria and definition of done in my previous explanation, I said that when you give a vague statement of what is done, like, okay, just finish the user story. Once you can finish the user story, you are done. Now, it doesn't matter whether that user story is buggy. It doesn't matter whether there are issues. You are just, as you are telling the developer that all you care about is just complete it in record time. So they will do what they think is the definition of done. Whereas what you were trying to say is that you want them to finish the user story and merge the code together so that there's unity in assessment, and that all the integrations, all the APIs are properly linked and connected. And the documentations that tells the future development of what is done or what is yet to be done or what was fixed is now notified. So which means that if you come back 3 months after, you can pretty much tell that, okay, these were the changes that were implemented and these were the criteria that we defined as done. All right. So here, this is where you now review risk. So risk is just more of like a discussion thing where you discuss potential challenges and dependencies that might impact the sprint. Like I said earlier, dependencies here in this case refers to things that you must achieve or things that you must get for each user story to be completed, which means that if your dependencies are not properly linked, connected, or well tied together, what you're going to be having is breakdown, chaos, and nightmares. So what will happen is that you finish building, you give it to develop to users to use, they click the button and nothing is working. That is what they call chaos and nightmare. You understand? That is because some dependencies were malfunctioning or malfunctioning. So which means that, say, for example, your real-time tracking is dependent on Google Map API as a dependency, which means you are dependent on Google Map API. And for whatever reason, there was a disconnection between the dependency that you are linking to and the final app that you have built. You are going to have malfunctioning or buggy applications. So you review all that to see what can be done to avoid situations like that. And that's where performance issues with real-time data processing, testing, and checking to be sure that everything is working as planned. So we are getting to the end. This is the end of the class where you are done now. We are coming to the end of our sprint planning meeting. So this is where you now recap on the sprint goal and select the backlog items and team commitment to be sure that everything happened or went as planned. And then the goal to implement a real-time order tracking is now effected because the developers have done everything and a team story point was committed and completed based on what was selected. Then you as the product manager or product owner checks that everybody agrees and is okay with the plan that has been set on ground. And once everything is finalized, everybody goes to work. That is the end of the sprint planning meeting, and that is the end of today's class. Thank you very much.